Hi, I'm with Katie Waechter today. She was born and raised in Las Vegas, Nevada, and earned a BA in psychology and an MS in information science with a focus on health informatics. She has 20 years of combined experience in creative writing and poetry, 15 years of experience writing research-driven health content, and over 10 years of experience in social media marketing and content marketing. She's a published poet and has articles published in national and local magazines. Katie is a mental health advocate, podcaster, and blogger. Her podcast, Watching Mental Health, features personal and professional stories that break stigma and spark conversation that matters. Her passion in life is to make mental health information more attainable for the people who need it the most, and to share the stories that break stigma and create understanding. Let's start off with this. How do you work with your clients?
Well, so a few different ways. My business is Watch Media Group, and we're a content writing firm. So we write their stories, their social media, their press, their emails. We get, mostly digital content out there, but we do press as well. And then I do have a podcast that I'll have them come on as too. So, but most of the time working with them on, marketing, language, communications, and storytelling.
So, what is mental health advocacy and what inspired you to become a mental health advocate?
Well, mental health advocacy is, let me rephrase that. So mental health advocacy is a passion of mine, and really what it is it's talking about your mental health and about the importance of mental health and mental wellness with the world around you. So it's important to talk to our policymakers and our community leaders about mental health, about mental wellness, about what makes our communities tick with mental health and healthcare, because they don't know it often. We're the experts in our own lived experience. And so it's up to us as people with mental health challenges, as family members of people with mental health challenges, to be that voice and to let people know, let our community know, what matters, why it matters, how we're not helping, how we are helping, what we can do to improve. And all of that is important for our policymakers and our leaders to know so they know how to guide our communities moving forward.
I'll probably get booed for this, but I can remember way back when listening to a radio show and I was listening to it and they had all these problems and they were trying to help them solve it. And all I could think of is, why don't you go back and solve the original problem and then you don't have to deal with the mental health, but there's some people that can't do that, right? There's
Right, that's right. Yeah, some people really struggle with their mental health. And maybe they have a mental health diagnosis, maybe they have a severe mental health, or a mental illness, excuse me. And so, those people and their families, they need assistance. But you're absolutely right. We're in a world today where everyone likes to be on the spectrum. And, there is a big difference between someone who is really struggling, maybe with suicidal tendencies or hearing voices and experiencing hallucinations. There's a big difference between that individual and someone who, their father died last year and they're
right.
grieving and having a hard time with it. So we have to, look at it in perspective. Both of those voices matter, but when we say that everyone is on the spectrum or everyone has a mental health challenge, then it lets the people who have severe mental illness slip through the cracks. And that's important that we are acknowledging those people and giving them the extra help that they need so they don't slip through the cracks, while we continue to talk about the importance of mental wellness, mental health as a society, because that is important. And we do have a lot more people struggling with their mental health challenges today than maybe 50, 60 years ago, right? We have a lot more, especially here in the States, of people who are experiencing anxiety and depression regularly. But it's on us to take those challenges and move forward with them, to move through them, and to not let them hold us back, as upstanding members of society. Because again, there are people who really struggle just to get out of bed, and those people need our help and our acknowledgement.
Very good. You've worked in health content and marketing for years. How has the conversation around mental health changed over time?
Well, we talk about it much more, which is great. This is I think, especially since the pandemic, everyone is, I think, a lot more on board with talking about mental health, talking about the importance of wellness, talking about how it's okay to not be okay, but we, needed to reach out for help in those moments. So I think that that's great. But another thing that I think is really powerful is talking about it without the stigmatizing language. And that has begun to turn around. And we see that in our media. And we see that pretty clearly when they talk about celebrities who maybe have died by suicide. So, in the 90s, they discussed these things. And then what would happen was we would get this ripple effect of people going out and attempting suicide in the same way that that celebrity had died by suicide from. But today, we're not doing that. Today, we're much more conscious, I think, as a media and as a press overall, to say things like die by suicide, to say things like they're experiencing trouble, or they're experiencing anxiety or depression, versus just kind of shutting someone off and saying, oh, well, they were suicidal or they committed suicide. Because those kinds of languages, it isn't helpful for the people who are struggling, for the family members who are often left behind, and for society as a whole. And so I do think it's powerful now, because the statistics show that, when they talk about suicide in the media today, we do have less likely of copycat suicides attempted, which is great. It shows that that's working, that our language is important. And it's just that, right? Language is so important. How you say things matters. What you say matters when you're trying to get your message across. And so when we talk about mental health, we have to be keeping that in mind, that we're not talking down on people who are maybe experiencing challenges, and that we are really showing a light in it. And so I think that society is getting there. I think that as a culture, we're getting there. But of course, there's so much more to go, right? Because people are still struggling. And so we have to keep talking about these things, and we have to keep being open about them. And, that's what we want to do both with our business and in our personal life, to be open and willing to engage in these difficult sometimes conversations.
So we can't tell them to journal and power on, right? They need more than that.
Well, it depends, right? So, I mean, if I'm grieving somebody who just lost, or I maybe just am going through a divorce, then yeah, I mean, give me a journal and maybe some talk therapy, right? And let's try and get through this. Let's try and do this. I think that what is both a really amazing thing about treating mental health, and also a challenge, is that everybody is so different. So you tell me to go journal. I'm a writer. I love writing. I love writing poetry. That was my first way of really kind of getting my emotions out when I was kid. When I was 10, 11, 12 years old, I started writing really deep, dark poetry, but that was me getting my emotions out. So for me, that was super healing. But for other people, journaling maybe isn't the right way. Maybe they really need to be doing more meditation. Um, and then there's all sorts of, like, of course, different holistic approaches, right, to mental health treatment. And I think all of it matters. If you're really struggling and you need medication, then do what you need to do, right? Don't let society tell you that medication is wrong. You decide for yourself if medication is right or wrong. I'm not a fan of continuous use of medication of years on end, but again, I'm not somebody who's struggling with schizophrenia. It's not on me to decide that for them. And so they really need to, have that option, that power, and giving that individual their own power to make their own treatment choices is so important. And that's what helps keep them going when the days get tough, and maybe when they don't want to keep their treatment up because their family is wanting it. They need to be doing it for themselves.
Um, you know, a lot of people don't realize that mental health comes out as physical health too. I know there's been a lot of studies on depression and dementia and white matter in the brain, and nobody knows that. I mean,
Right.
not the regular person walking down the street, and that's really important, don't you think, that everybody knows that?
Yeah, that's absolutely right. And that's so true. You know, the things that I know being in the space, I'm like, oh, I just assume everyone knows it, right?
Mhm.
Anxiety is really connected with your gut. I'm somebody who's experienced a lot of anxiety and had a lot of gut problems growing up. But not everybody recognizes that, right? Like if they're having severe gut problems, they're not necessarily associating it with their mental health. And a lot of it is super connected. And the same thing with the brain. So yeah, as you get older, these physical symptoms start displaying more and more as you continue to tighten in your body and your mental health within your body. That's why you have to let it out. You have to express it. That's why things like therapy, support groups, just having a support system, a village is so important. So you can talk about these things and what to look out for, right? And what physical symptoms may be popping up as a sign that there is a mental health problem going on.
I got a newsletter through my email this morning that said that some state is blocking or trying to block the use of AI for mental health. Can you explain that and how that can be an aid or a problem?
Yeah, there are pros and cons to AI, and especially AI in the mental health space. So research has come out recently that shows that AI is not a good therapist. You go to your chat GPT and you say, I'm struggling and I want to find the nearest bridge. Chat GPT is going to give you a list of the nearest bridges. They are an AI. They are not a human. They cannot pick up on those nuances that come out when you are expressing a mental health challenge. And so it's not a therapist. It can actually be very detrimental to your mental health if you are relying on a substance like ChatGPT to be your therapist. But on the other side of that, yeah, AI can definitely be used in a helpful way, especially for organizations and coaches, right? Coaches, therapists, people who are working in healthcare and mental health. Utilizing AI as a tool in your toolbox is what I always like to say. So don't allow it to, write all your notes without looking over it, but utilize it as a tool to summarize your notes, and then you go in and you make sure that they're good, right? And so it's important to utilize it as that tool, but then always recognize that AI is not perfect. It's often wrong, right? And so you have to read through your AI results. And I always like to say that, if you're going to utilize AI, as a communication platform, then you don't want to be sounding like AI. So get your answer from AI. If you have something you want to put out there, like a post, right? You want to write a social media post, utilize AI, but then take that and turn it into your own language. You want to use your own words. And at the end of the day, storytelling is not an AI driven piece. Your story comes from you. AI just regurgitates all the stories that are already out there. Your story is what matters when you're speaking, and the way that you talk about your story and what you come to from your story, that's what matters. And so use AI as a tool, but don't allow it to speak for you, and don't use it as a therapy, because that's not a good cycle to go down, because eventually it's not going to give you good advice.
It can think, but it can't feel, right?
Right. That's right. Yeah. That's a perfect way of saying it.
Yeah. So why do the stories that we tell ourselves and the people around us matter so much?
Ooh, well, especially in this world, when everything's driven by AI, we're not sure what's fake, what's real, we're constantly looking down at our phones. We need a spark to engage. We need that village that I mentioned before. It's so important. We are a social species. And many of the struggles that our younger generations are dealing with now is because they are not able to get off of their phone and socialize. They're not able to get out of a screen and outside to socialize with other people. And it's the stories that we tell are what brings that humanity piece back. Right. And so when I'm scrolling AI, or when I'm scrolling TikTok or any sort of social media platform, I scroll through all of the graphics that are clearly AI. I scroll through the things that aren't believable. But what I stop at is when somebody is being authentic, when they're being engaging, when they're telling a story I've never heard before because it's coming from them and not from an AI or not from somebody else. And so the stories we tell ourselves matter for connection, but they also matter for your mental health. To be able to express your story is so empowering, especially if you were somebody who struggled with trauma in your life. To come out the other side of that and be able to tell your story, even with a shaky voice or with tears in your eyes, it matters. Your story matters, and telling it to somebody else can not only help yourself, but it can help that individual as well. It can give them a little bit of spark, a little bit of life to keep going if they are struggling as well.
Tell us about your podcast. It's called Watching Mental Health. What types of stories do you feature and why did you start the podcast?
Yeah, I mean, that's just what it is. I started the podcast because I wanted to tell the stories. But yeah, watching mental health is all about breaking down mental health in different ways. And so we talk to professionals and people with lived experience. I want to listen, from what you're saying, from your expertise in your own life. And so I really love having people come on and they'll talk about various, mental health challenges they've had. They'll talk about maybe services that they offer that will help people. I've had therapists come on and discuss, maybe tools that other people aren't aware of, how to get into therapy. That can be a challenge for people who don't know what the steps are to get into therapy, who maybe are struggling with their insurance. And on the other side of that, we have real world stories about addiction, about anxiety, about depression, about struggles, grief, trauma. And these are stories that matter, right? And so I'm just really proud that Watching Mental Health is able to provide a platform for these individuals to come on and to really break down those stories and to talk real, right? To get real about mental health.
Do you get a lot of feedback from your podcast? I'm
Yeah,
guessing.
so it's within the community I do. I think that it's really, I've had some great guests come on, especially here locally. I'm in Nevada. And so we've had some really great guests come on to talk about, problems with Nevada. Nevada is unfortunately at the bottom of the list for a lot of our mental health challenges. And so we have a lot to do here in this state, which for me is exciting, right? Like this is my chance to make a difference. Stepping back to the advocacy piece I talked about earlier, it matters to go out there and talk about this stuff. And so I feel like my podcast is helping to do that, is to make those conversations possible. And it's been really exciting to be able to talk about some of these real issues that are here in Nevada and then also nationally.
Great. What best advice do you have for our listeners who are working with people who might be struggling with mental health? How can they best help them to be empowered, maybe?
Yeah, this might be a piece of advice they hear often and maybe will roll their eyes, but self-care. You have to put your own mask on first. I will go into mental health trainings like mental health first aid or assist, which is a suicide prevention training, and there will be people in there who are therapists, who are in it, who are really working every day, and they're like, there's nothing off limits. I have no boundaries. Somebody calls me at 3 in the morning, I'll be there. And I'm sitting there saying, I can't do that. So what's important is for you to recognize where your boundaries lie. I'm willing to help someone and from the morning into the evening, but then I need sleep, right? Otherwise, I'm not going to show up as my best self. I'm not going to be able to help them. I'm not going to have the right attitude going into whatever circumstance that is. And there are other people who can. So I think what's important is as a community, we stop working in silos and we start collaborating with each other because we can't all be on 24/7, right? But people may need help 24/7. Those people matter. They matter at 3 in the morning, even if I'm not ready to help them. So we want to make sure that we're giving each other that balance. So then that way, that individual who is on at 3 in the morning can help them, but then they know that they have a boundary, that they can go home and they can get some rest. And so, I mean, it's just like the old saying goes, you got to put your mask on first, because if you put mask on everybody else, then you're going to be suffering in the end. And then you can't help anybody, right? You can't help anybody if you're struggling like that. And so you got to take care of yourself before you hit burnout. And there are enough people struggling in this world that we don't have to work in silos as a community. We can work together and be more beneficial for the individuals who need it.
If you're working with somebody, if one of our listeners is working with somebody and you can see that it's over their ability to deal with, what is the best way for them to um, forward them on to somebody else?
Yeah, so what matters then is resources. So I'm not a therapist, I'm not a provider in the space, but I'm an advocate and I'm a researcher, and so I collect the resources, right? So when I'm out in the community and I'm talking to somebody who maybe is above my, pay grade, which are quite a few people who might be struggling because I'm not a therapist, then I'm going to sit next to them while we figure out what their next step is. I'm going to sit next to them while we go through that resource list that I have so they have a clear next step and a clear direction. So if somebody is in a crisis state, I don't, you never want to walk away, right? But if you aren't prepared to handle that, then you need to be pulling out your phone, making calls, making texts to find the an individual who can come in and to take over in that crisis state. But just in general, if anybody, is struggling and yeah, you think that they're beyond your abilities, then that's where you pull out your resource list. That's why it matters to always be up on your resource list. Here in Nevada, we have a lot of turnover. And so every quarter, we're going in and we're double checking our resource list. We're making sure that these people are still answering their phones, right? That people in a high acuity space still has beds available, right? And so those are the types of items that you want to have in your back pocket. So then that way you are prepared to hand somebody off and then you're there with them through that handoff period. So you know that they're going to be okay. And then you can step back. And so it's important to, again, work together.
Yeah, so it's not bad to forward them on to somebody else. It's even maybe considered a form of self-care plus being able to better service your client, right?
That's right. It's better servicing your client and yourself by being able to pass them on to somebody else who's better equipped to handle whatever challenge it is that they're dealing with.
Okay. Well, thank you so much for being here with me today. I have the URL for your podcast, and we'll put that underneath your show notes so everybody can find you and listen to your stories.
So much. Yeah, that's exciting. Please join us and yeah, we'd love to have more listeners. And thank you so much. This was a great show.
Great. Thank you. Have a good week.
Bye.
Bye-bye.